Today I'm going to be talking about the subtle levels of consciousness. Whoop. But first, a joke. A 6-year-old is taking speech therapy. He has trouble saying CH and keeps saying K instead. And the teacher's trying to work with him this day. The therapist is trying to work with him and goes, so try to say chicken. And the kid says kitchen. And the teacher, being very patient, again says, okay, let's try it again. Chicken. And the kid says kitchen. And the teacher says, okay, come on, you can do it. Let's try it again. And the kid says, how about we just call it a duck? And actually, that joke leads right into my talk for today, because there's so many things that we think of when we think of as black and white, we cut off that which is most important to us. We cut off that which we can see deeper into by thinking that things have to be one way or another. You know, poisons, arsenic will kill you. And, if you think about it as black and white, you won't know that it's actually used in some medication to kill cancer. Cyanide will kill you. And yet it is a heart remedy. So if we think of things in terms of this is what they are, we cut off the possibility of the subtlety about, well, maybe if it's a different dose, maybe if it's in a different amount, it could be something completely different. And that's really true for things that are really good for you too. Orange juice is great. And yet there are people who have had vitamin C poisoning by taking too much vitamin C. Here it is, this thing that's supposed to be really good for you, but you could have too much of it. And so there's always this way in which we want to be looking at what is the right amount, the perfect and right amount of whatever it is we're looking at and doing. And things can go really badly when we don't do that for ourselves. When I was younger and I was in rock and roll, I had written this song that everybody said was a hit. In fact, people thought of it so much as a hit, I was approached by one of the largest music publishing houses in the world, and they asked if they could sign the song to give to one of their other artists. And I was dead set on me being the artist bringing that song forth, and totally missed the idea that, of course, I would write other songs, and that by letting them have it, I was working my way up slowly instead of just leaping to the top of the food chain in the music business, which is what I thought at that young age was the best way to do it, and refused to sell the song. That song, I recorded that song, and being a nobody, it never became a hit, and very few people have ever heard of it. Had I looked at more of the subtleties, had I looked at more of the possibilities, had opened my eyes to the true step that it was, who knows what would have occurred after that? I'll never know, because I didn't do it. I didn't look at it that way. And so I lost that opportunity. And I think that happens a lot, is that we lose opportunities when we think something has to be one way or another, when we don't take the time or the sensitivity to sit back and go, what is the level here, and what is really possible when we don't hold so hard to a particular line? When I first came to Spirit Works, I held, as Reverend Trish will attest to, a very hard line on science of mind principle. I would not waver from that line because I am so sure of its power and presence. But in doing so, half the congregation left. And so, in looking back on that, I can see where if I was willing more to allow for the subtleties of different people's interpretations and how they felt the science of mind, it would not impinge on what I held as my principles, and that would have allowed them to be more a part of what Spirit Works was becoming, and may not have had the level of exodus that we wound up having because of my hard stance at the time. It was a tough lesson. Unfortunately for me, I've had to learn this tough lesson many times in my life and could give you many other examples of it. My thought is you may have examples for yourself of where you held a hard line that in retrospect, had you been softer about it, had you thought more about it, been more sensitive to what the possibilities, you would have seen that your ability to have what you want would have been possible without the hardness of the holding of the line. In music, when we are what's called mixing music, mixing different musical sounds together, like I just did for the music video I played for you guys, and will be playing again at the end. When I was mixing that, one of the things, there's several ways in which you bring forth a sound like my wife's vocal in that. One is simply shoving up the volume. And there are even two ways to mix that. There's something called gain, which is what's called a gross volume change, which means you change it a little bit and it actually allows for it to change a lot. And then there's the fader, which you can move a lot to change it a little. So you have more control, a more sensitivity to it. But there's even a way to get even more sensitive with it, which is called equalization, where you can actually tweak the individual frequencies inside a sound to bring out that sound even more. One of the more interesting things about equalization is you could actually cut off a frequency to make it sound louder. You bring down something to bring some, and something automatically sounds up and louder. Now, what does this have to do with your life? Well, the level of sensitivity we bring to it allows us to see our lives in different ways than we may not have to see, having seen them before. But here's the kicker. The only way to be sensitive is to be vulnerable. And many of us were brought up to not be vulnerable. In the music business, you're taught that the only way to make it in the music business is to have tough skin, to have thick skin, so that all the times you're criticized and put down doesn't bother you. But the downside of that is that then you lose your sensitivity to what's going on around you. What I've been learning late in life is that the more sensitive and vulnerable I can be, actually, the greater my impact on what it is I'm doing, on who I'm being in the world. And it's hard because the more sensitive I am, it seems the easier I can get hurt emotionally. And my wife will attest that actually my emotions get hurt pretty darn easily. But the thing is as I become more sensitive to even my own hurt feelings, instead of having the tough skin I developed all those years in the music business, I find that I am more sensitive to what's possible in situations where I might have my feelings hurt. the possibilities arise in ways that I never even would have anticipated. Ash and I were talking just the other day about how we feel closer than ever. And yet, both of us, as we become more vulnerable, can have our feelings hurt even easier. How does that work? How does that work that your feelings can get hurt really easily, and yet you can develop something that becomes stronger? And yet that is what happens. It's counterinstinctual. I'm not going to go into the whole thing on why there's nothing counterintuitive, which is what most people would say here. That's a whole nother talk I've already given. And my wife has a couple of videos on if you want to go see them. But the key here is the more vulnerable we can be, the more sensitive we can be to what's possible in any situation. Sounds hard. And from my own personal experience, is hard. But that doesn't change the fact that it's powerful. True power lies in our sensitivity. And then all of a sudden, instead of compromise, which is the word that people use who are not being vulnerable, there's a way of working with people that feels right. And it's not a compromise. This is a subtle difference. There's something here that is very powerful that I bring to you today. The difference between compromise and sensitive navigation. Because in sensitive navigation, I find I don't walk away feeling like I compromised. I feel like I found what I truly wanted, something deeper. And this is the different layers. You know, we talk a lot about our discovery of consciousness being similar to the taking away the layers of an onion or an artichoke. But I'm starting to discover that it's actually not that at all. Because when you take away the cover of an onion, you discard what you've taken off. And I haven't discarded anything. In fact, what I find is with each layer, I find there's a way that what I have used in the past can work in the present, but not in the same way. Every skill you have built in your life, every way of perception you have built in your life is useful, just in different amounts. So it's not that you want to discard the old ways of seeing the world. I hear, like when we were kids, we saw the world in a particular way. And I've heard lots of people say that that's not useful anymore, that we must perceive the world as adults now. And yet, what I am discovering, the deeper and more sensitive I get, is that some of the ways in which I saw the world as a child still work in a much smaller dose. That it's not poison. If I use how I perceived in the past with how I perceive in the present together to form a much more bigger, a much bigger, much more bigger, a much more sensitive picture of life. I am discovering that everything I have gained throughout my life is still useful. And the more I am willing to be sensitive to the possibilities, the more I am able to recognize in what dose each one of those perceptions is useful to me. Now, Trish talked earlier about turning to science of mind, and I do that as well. I also turn to Buddhism. I also turn to Zen. I also turn to Christianity, not the kind that's taught in the churches, but the kind that Jesus preached. I am very, very big on his parables. I love Jesus's parables. And they are very useful to me when I start feeling particularly angry. The turning of the other cheek, the fact that there is beauty and love no matter what is going on is an incredibly useful fact is the wrong word, but concept would be the right word there for me. And so I combine that with science of mind. I combine that with other teachings I've had. All of us have run into many teachers in our lives and learned things from them that are useful in the right dose. So we all need to become our own personal pharmacist is the wrong word, but alchemist. Alchemist. Every single one of us is an alchemist to our own consciousness. And the more we are willing to look at our consciousness like not just one thing, but a myriad of hundreds of different items that can be blended in thousands of different ways, we open up to possibilities of perception, of action that never would have occurred to us in the past. I know this is true for me. I'm starting to see life in so many different ways as I combine everything I have within me. And then in sitting with Trish and sitting with Ash and sitting with my friends and my congregation and everyone I get to talk with, I get to view life through a myriad of different lenses, combining them. You ever sit in a doctor's office, get glasses, and what do? They don't just, they take one and then they do the next one, but then they also combine them, right? Getting them, and they twist them around this way and they twist them around this way until finally you go, that's it. That's how I'm seeing best. It isn't just one, right? They combine them. They move them around until it's just right. That really is a way to view life. But to do it, you got to be willing to be vulnerable. You got to be willing to be hurt and then perceive that hurt. Find the lens that can perceive that hurt differently than you might have felt it otherwise. I guarantee you've got one. We've all got hundreds, if not thousands, of different lenses we can use and combine and move them around until we finally find the view that works for that moment. The difference between glasses and the way we perceive life is that glasses usually, with one prescription, usually lasts for a while before you need to get a new prescription. I've been finding that I need to be working with my perception and my view almost, circumstance to circumstance. It's like, which circumstance, because the perception and view I used for the last circumstance sometimes doesn't work for the next one. So you got to dig in deeper, search around. The key here is, one of the things that I've talked about in the past is finding the good. But what I'm realizing is it's not about finding the good. It's about finding the best perception. This isn't about, because when I think about finding the good, I'm still looking out there. When I'm thinking about finding the best perception, once again, I've put it back in here. And that's where we want it. We always want to wind up with it's back in here. So it's not about finding the good out there. It's about finding the best perception we can in here. That's what's possible. But to do it, we got to be willing to be vulnerable. We got to be willing to shed off that thick skin. Now, as I'm saying that, I'm sitting here going, well, you know what? I'll bet that thick skin is useful sometimes. So men were shedding it, maybe not get rid of it, keep it around as something else, allow yourself to get back in. You know, like you don't wear a winter coat in the summertime, but it's good to keep it around for the winter. So that's probably true with thick skin as well. I'm sure that it does me good sometimes to have it around so that I can use it when I need it. Everything we've done in life doesn't need, it's all useful on some level. Everything you have done in your life is useful on some level. The question is, what level is that? How can you use your entire life, everything in your current moment, to find the perfect and best perception? Because that's really what we want. The best perception we can get at every given moment. And I notice that when I really think about this and really put it to work when I need it most, the conditions change. Not just the perception. It may start with the perception, but then all of a sudden, new things pop up. And for me personally, I've started to notice that I expect that more and more. I expect things to work out. That has become my expectation, no matter how bad things look. And in doing so, it becomes quicker and easier for those perceptions, those layers, those different ways of being that I have developed throughout my entire life, that I have not gotten rid of, that are still with me, that I can still bring forth, come forth, and I am able to organize them and be sensitive to them so that the best one pops forward. I was thinking today how I am not the same person I was in my 20s by any stretch of the imagination. But a lot of that has to do with the experience I had from my 20s to now and having all those new perceptions to work with and having all those to bring in and be with. I'll tell you, man, it's really something to have so much depth and wealth of experience to pull upon to create the perception that will work best for me. And I know that that will work for you too. It is simply not true that I am special, that somehow I have some special power or something. It is simply that I have practiced and put this to work in the same way that you can. You have the power and the presence and the sensitivity to bring forth the best perception you can have for every condition and circumstance and unknown in your life. You have it in you to bring forth. That's the beauty of classes. That's the beauty of hanging around people who can support you in this, is they can help bring that out in you. Bring out in you that which is best. I love the opportunities I am presented with all the time. I love you all so much, and I know that this is possible for you. Don't think that it's one way or another. You have thousands of ways it can be within you. Thousands of ways to perceive within you. Move those glasses around. Try different lenses in different ways. Try them in ways you never even thought of before. I love it when I bring in my 6-year-old perspective when I need it most. It's amazing how clear that can help with just a drop of it at just the right time. Especially when it comes to my sense of humor. You know, the more we can bring humor forth, the better life is anyway. And I love bringing my humor forth. I love you all. This is my talk for today. Bring forth that which is within you. Be sensitive and know that if you are upset or anything, you have another perspective that is within you to bring forth, to shift that little bit of lens, to bring forth that which is most important in your life. I love you. God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What I give, I receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am, and so it is.